Okie dokie. As we continue our conversation, we're going to move generally from the duodenum down the intestinal tract through the jejunum and the ileum. Again, before we get into the details, let's look at the anatomy. So we see here that the intestinal tract, I've mentioned so far, is this tube. Well, it's not just a tube. It's kind of like the Mac Daddy of garden hoses. It's got a very complex system here. And so what we'll see is that this tube is really a very diverse, complex structure. If we were to zoom in on our intestinal tract, as we are here, there's that first picture I showed you showing that lumen, but we find that what's actually happening is that we have these folds. So it's kind of like skin folds. If you imagine a really wrinkly little puppy dog, you might have folds. Well, they have folds, and these folds of epithelial of the surface of the intestinal tract are then lined by another structure, which are called villi. These are like little fingers of your stomach, finger-like projections. And in addition to the folds and these larger villi, on top of every villi is an enterocyte. And the enterocytes themselves have microvilli. So we'll see that all of this is simply to increase surface area. So it's not just the garden hose type surface where you got to move quickly through that intestinal tract. All the time, as the intestinal muscles work, can move it across those folds, across those villi, and even at that brush border. It kind of makes sense. It looks like a little hairbrush or toothbrush. At that brush border, we see those microvilli. And it's through these microvilli and through these enterocytes that we absorb our food. So now that we've digested stuff, we can talk about absorbing things. And so this absorption is going to take place in a couple different areas. We'll see the lymphatic system and the circulatory system. Now the lymphatic system, specifically in that villi, the lacteal, is where your fatty substances will go, your larger fats and your fat-soluble vitamins. Your proteins, some of your tiny little fats, your carbohydrates, they'll go into the capillaries of the circulatory system. And so we have this blood supply that goes into our intestine. That's very important for health. The villi are very important for health. If these villi break down, as they might in a gastric disorder or even things like Crohn's disease, we'll break those villi down. We're certainly going to impair your body's capacity to absorb its food. So let's take a look at kind of what's happening as we absorb our food then. What we'll see here is that we have this complex system that I've talked about. And there's your villi, there's your folds and your villi. And substances will be made down in the start of that. So if we were to sneak back here, behind the intestine, here I am. I'm going to absorb my food down here. As I get to the tip of that villi, these cells way here at the top, they're going to have the potential to slough off. So some of these enterocytes, over time, we want them to do that. There may be the older cells are going to slough off, and we will excrete them. Okay, so we'll excrete them. But here is where we're going to absorb our food. And these villi, they start way down here, and they move up that pathway to the top, and again, where they could be excreted later. So now let's look closer then still from here to here. There's our enterocytes, and as I mentioned, that's where things are going to get absorbed. But different types of absorption are going to happen in different ways. So we've got diffusion. So we sneak back here again. Means the substances will just kind of go right in. They diffuse. And certain things will diffuse into the body. For example, your fats, your lipids, will diffuse into the enterocyte. So if we look over here, what happens with diffusion? We see lipids. And we'll talk again about how that can get a little complicated. Facilitated diffusion means that we need to have a little bit of assistance. So there is a protein right here at the surface of that cell. And it's going to allow for the product to pass through. And it's going to be a specific product. It's going to match up with that. An example here would be fructose. Fructose undergoes facilitated diffusion. And last but certainly not least, we can also have a similar protein here that's going to bind a specific compound or molecule. But it's also going to need a little assistance in the form of ATP. That's energy. Believe it or not, it takes energy or calories to digest your food. So certain compounds will be broken down, and this would be like amino acids. So amino acids will be absorbed your proteins through active transport. So active transport, facilitated diffusion, and regular diffusion. Now there is one more they didn't talk about, and that's osmosis. Your water can go through via osmosis. And so we see here's just basic overview of absorption and the different compounds that are absorbed in different ways on that enterocyte or into that enterocyte through the microvilli of the brush border of your intestinal tract.